Do old precons hold up? In the over 10 years since the original Commander precons featuring Carador, Animar, and the Mimeoplasm, a lot has changed in Magic power levels, and especially in the construction and ethos of building a precon. This is a concept we've explored before, updating the Marin of Clan Nel Toth precon, but I want to revisit one of my favorite generations of precons, 2018 and the multicolored Planeswalker precons. Specifically, Nature's Vengeance, starring Lord Windgrace, a landfall-focused Jund deck. Partly because it's a banger of a deck, and partly because I'm running a special giveaway to win a copy of the Modern Horizons 3 Jund Precon Graveyard Overdrive. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, and comment Jund 'em out for your chance to win. Now back in 2018, precons came with 3 unique commanders. In this case, our box legend Lord Windgrace, Gyrus, Waker of Corpses, and Thantis the Warweaver. But I want to focus on Lord Windgrace, a Planeswalker commander that epitomizes Jund 'em out in grinding value, using Graveyard as a resource, and eventually popping off to win entirely fairly. At 5 mana and starting at 5 loyalty, Windgrace has the following abilities. +2, discard a card then draw a card. If a land card is discarded this way, draw an additional card. -3, return up to 2 target land cards from your graveyard onto the battlefield. -11, destroy up to 6 target non-land permanents, then create 6 2/2 green cat warrior creature tokens with Forest Walk. And of course, Lord Windgrace is one of the rare planeswalkers that can be your commander. There is a lot of value on this commander. +2 to draw up to 2 cards is huge, and dumping stuff in our yard is, like, exactly what we want to do. In these colors, most resources we put in the graveyard aren't gone forever, whether it be reanimating a creature or flashbacking a spell, but card draw in the command zone is never a bad thing. But when our Walker's -3 just recycles those resources for us, it's even better. Through discard or self-mill, we can basically tutor up lands to bring back with Windgrace's ability, whether it be as simple as a Forgotten Cave or as busted as a Gaia's Cradle. Then, in Magical Christmas Land, -11 provides us with amazing board control and 12 power worth of bodies. Not going to happen every day, not straight up a game winner, but it's a strong ability nonetheless. But Wingrace is all about incremental value and ramp, ramp, ramp. Let's get our landfall on. And first, let's cover what the original precon got right, including some decent landfall enablers in the list. Budoka Gardener, Sakura Tribe Elder, and Farhaven Elf were, at the time, some of the very best of these effects and allowed for multiple landfall triggers at a time. And, once upon a time, Yavimaya Elder was like one of the best creatures ever. It tutored land, it drew you a card, and it was a body you wanted dying. But these days, we can do way better. The ramp spells in the deck being Cultivate, Far Wanderings, and Explosive Vegetation definitely speak to the era of construction too. While Wingrace does cost 5, we have far better options these days. I also really like some of the landfall options in the original list. Classic Avenger of Zendikar and Rampaging Balos have not gone out of style in the 6+ years since this was released, and Nesting Dragon is still an amazing finisher all these years later too. But including game-ending spells like Worm Harvest is a big plus. There's really no better way to Jund 'em out in Commander than making dozens of 1/1 worms every turn. Honestly, it's a favorite of mine still. Some great original cards in the deck too that can't be glossed over. Crash of Rhino Beetles, Windgrace's Judgment, and Fury Storm all have their uses and have found homes in decks in the intervening years. But I'm just not sure if this deck is still a home for these cards all of these years later. The Loyal cycle first appeared in these precons as well, with Loyal Apprentice, Loyal Subordinate, and Loyal Guardian all being very, very good in the format since their introduction, with some going as far as to see competitive play. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are a lot of questionable decisions in the original list too, like including 43 lands. Even in a landfall deck, 43 lands is overkill, with 40 lands being much closer to acceptable in my opinion. And in a 3-color deck, you don't need to include colorless lands like Haunted Fengraf, bad fetch lands like Myriad Landscape, and, worst of them all, Temple of the False God. Landfall deck or not, there's never a need for Temple. Another failing of the original list is including only 2 draw engines outside of your commander. Deathreap Ritual, an odd choice for a non-aristocrat deck, and Seer's Sundial, which makes a lot more sense for the deck's core landfall theme. This is a big miss on original deck design. Also, the choice to include only X-cost board wipes is a choice too. Gaze of Granite, Lavalanche, and Savage Twister are all fine, don't get me wrong, but they're all wrong on the curve for this deck even with ramping. In this day and age, the chances of getting ahead of the toughness of creatures with just ramp alone gets slimmer and slimmer. The other issue is the deck's mana curve. A full 11 of the 29 creatures in the deck, almost 50%, cost 6 or more mana. That's more than your 5 mana commander. You're almost assured to have cast maybe one spell ahead of your commander, which to today's standards leaves you far behind tempo and likely already overwhelmed by opponents, and with nothing of a board presence to protect your planeswalker commander. That brings us to the big question: how do we update this deck to today's standards? One of the biggest changes in deck design is that we now only have 2 unique legends in the deck's color identity, and cards have fallen into 3 categories: Commander A theme, Commander B theme, or ideally an overlap of both. For Nature's Vengeance, I'd recommend we keep Gyris, Waker of Corpses, and drop Thantis the Warweaver, so our themes align with Landfall for Lord Windgrace and Graveyard Recursion for Gyris. This gives us some good core themes that all of our colors thrive in, and we won't be lacking options to include. I'll cut from the list anything that doesn't fall into these 2 categories: Zoncha Sleeper Agent, the Loyal Cycle, Emissary of Grudges. Flameblast Dragon, Whiptongue Hydra, and Moldgraph Monstrosity can all get cut. We can also trim out Savage Twister, Gaze of Granite, Ruinous Path, Hunting Wilds, Reality Scramble, Fury Storm, and a few other odds and ends. Be sure to check out the history feature in Moxfield for the full list of cuts and adds. Next, we want to add in ways to allow us to reuse resources in our graveyard, primarily lands, but some creatures too. Ramunap Excavator, Splendid Reclamation, and Aftermath Analyst are all must-have cards for the deck, as it wants us to be dumping lands into our graveyard. Not losing them forever, or not being forced to use Wingrace's -3 to get them back is ideal. Perennial Behemoth is a great fit for this slot too. Cheap, with some upsides, and a big booty to boot, even if it conflicts with our commander's mana cost. But Conduit of Worlds seems like a perfect crossover of our graveyard recursion themes, allowing us to play lands from our graveyard while also giving us the option to cast a permanent from our graveyard too. Bulking up our landfall is recommended as well. With Tireless Tracker, Scoot Swarm, and Tireless Provisioner, it gives us a lot of angles to leverage us ramping out of control, through resources or just more bodies. Ob Nixilis the Fallen is a great include as a landfall win con, as recurring a stack of lands out of our yard all at once, with each costing an opponent 3 life, is a good way to whammy your opponents in this deck. Speaking of a real whammy, Evolution Sage didn't exist when Wingrace was first printed. If it was, people would have immediately slammed it into the deck. Turning each landfall trigger into another loyalty counter turns that -11 ability on Wingrace from a pipe dream into something that may happen multiple times per game. Upping the deck's removal package is much needed, as format staples like Beast Within and Chaos Warp were really missing from the original deck list despite being in, seemingly, every recent precon. I think Bitter Triumph deserves a spot in the deck too, as the additional cost of discarding a card serves us well in a graveyard-focused deck. A card in the yard is never lost to junk. Decaying Time Loop, along the same lines, is a great way to dump resources into the yard and refill our hands over and over. With Retrace, it can be cast from the graveyard again and again, so another resource that is never truly gone. The new World Soul's Rage is exactly what this deck wants too, not only acting as removal, but potentially another mass of landfall triggers. It's a recent card, but it's a must-have for this deck. And we can certainly recoup some of the removed board wipes with a few favorites. Blasphemous Act, Toxic Deluge, and Culling Ritual all fit the deck's themes and are incredibly useful to us. While they can't be recast from the graveyard, they're still great, effective ways to ensure our commander, a planeswalker, stays safe while the board is gone. There is only one artifact I want to add to the deck, and that's got to be Zuran Orb. I can totally understand why this isn't in any precons, but we need a reliable way to sacrifice lands in the deck. 2 life per land is great when those lands don't stay gone long, and in a lot of cases, can come right back into play. With Zuran Orb and Splendid Reclamation, you're assuring a massive landfall bomb to end most games. And a few more enchantments round out our non-land permanents. First with Spelunking, quickly becoming one of my favorite cards. Not only does it draw you a card, but it potentially ramps you and makes sure your lands enter untapped. This is a big bonus when your ramp puts lands into play tapped normally. It's such a huge value win, I recommend it to everyone. Then there's Zendikar's Royal, another landfall card that can win you games. Unlike Rampaging Balos, Royal only makes you 2/2s, but it's not as easy to remove as a creature is, and it can come down sooner. A must-have. Finally is Oversouled Cemetery. I cannot undersell how useful this 2-mana enchantment is in any graveyard-focused deck. With this one, we're dumping cards into the yard over and over, and each turn this helps us get our best creature back. Even if that's just a Sakura Tribe Elder each turn, or if it's a win con, it's too good to miss. Now, most importantly are the lands. We're replacing quite a few, and most folks would advocate for Dark Depths and Glacial Chasm in the list, but let's keep things more simple and more civil. I'm also not going to recommend Strip Mine or Wasteland, though they are perfectly valid options. We aren't going full power here, just updating the precon. Feel free to add them in as upgrades. Ghost Quarter, on the other hand, is a fine include. Spot land removal or a way to get a few more of your lands into the graveyard is fine. Land destruction is not a boogeyman in Commander as long as it's not locking someone out of the game. Lotus Field would be another recommendation of mine too, since it can both ramp you and get lands into your graveyard. I think this is a decent addition to the deck as one of your pricier lands. Ziatora's Proving Ground would be amazing to have included in a precon like this too. Not that Wizards would ever do it. Covering your colors or being able to be cycled and played from your graveyard covers like all of the bases we want from a land in a deck like this. Fabled Passage ends up being the best fetch land we can include in our deck too, as recurring it can easily help strip our deck of basic lands fast. It's a fraction of the price of the other fetches. For now at least, until we get them reprinted in Modern Horizons 3. Now, if we're adding in a few extra bucks to the deck, well, we can definitely do the upgrade. Starting with more lands. Fetches go unsaid here. They're really good in any landfall deck where we can play lands from our graveyard. But the channel lands from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, Takenuma, Sokazan, Boseiju are all amazing too. These channel lands are as good in your hand, your graveyard, or in play, and really makes for an awesome additional angle to your deck. Echoing Deeps is a good snag. It's not very expensive, but it acts like a Vesuva for cards in your graveyard, getting you extra copies of real banger lands, such as Cabal Coffers, classic for lands and big mana strategies in black. Paired with Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, this is how you ramp out of control and get those 7+ mana cards into play early. But the big one would really be Field of the Dead. This is the one you want to copy multiple times, being not legendary and easily meeting the requirement for differently named lands in a deck like this. If I were building this deck, this would be the first card I upgrade. But if you're building, or rather rebuilding, this precon, or if you've built Lord Windgrace before, let me know in the comments and share your deck list. You can check out my deck list at my sponsor, Moxfield. Moxfield is the best deck building platform in the world, and makes it easy to see my cuts and additions with their history function. While you're there, follow my profile to never miss a brew. And while you're here, check out these other videos, including the return of Let's Do a Brew. If you were inspired to build a deck today, you have to hit that subscribe button. It's the law. And as always, folks, good luck and have fun.